You might feel like you have the very best intentions, that you're trying to do all the right things, that you're trying to say all the right things, and yet for whatever reason, trust on your team feels off. Feedback keeps surprising you. That tension, if you feel it, first off, that's normal. But that tension often points to a gap between how we think we show up as leaders and how we intend to show up, and then how we are actually experienced by others. And closing that gap is at the heart of what I call congruent leadership. And that is what this YouTube channel is all about. Hi there, I'm LeAnne Lagasse. I'm a former communication professor turned leadership consultant and keynote speaker, and the author of The Congruent Leader. Through years of research and teaching and consulting and executive coaching with leaders across industries, across the United States, I've seen something show up time and time again. A theme that keeps emerging is leaders who really want to do a great job and still feel like they're struggling to understand why they're not getting the outcomes that they want, right? Their intentions are not matching their impact. So here's the bad news, right? According to researchers, while most of us tend to think that we're highly self-aware, the vast majority of us statistically are actually not as self-aware. In fact, most researchers will say that somewhere between 10 to 15% of leaders are actually self-aware. So that gap between intention and impact shapes so much on our teams. It shapes trust, it shapes engagement, it shapes culture, it shapes, of course, whether the people that we lead feel seen and motivated or whether they feel guarded and uncertain. Real leadership is about closing that gap so that we can serve people well. So what does it mean though to be a congruent leader? Leadership that is congruent is aligned. So it's when who you are and what you value and how you show up as a leader reinforce one another over time. So in other words, if you're a congruent leader, your internal beliefs align with external behaviors. Your values show up in decisions that you're making. The teams that you lead experience you as consistent because your behavior over time is aligned. Your teams experience you as more credible because your words and your actions match. Congruence creates a sense of grounding and stability on teams because people know where you stand. And, that stability matters so much more than most of us realize because, our patterns impact people over time and trust grows through consistency. So even a small gap between how a leader intends to be experienced and how they are actually experienced shapes the organization. So that gap, that realization about that gap is what led me to write The Congruent Leader. I wrote this book for leaders who care deeply about their work and about their impact, leaders who want to lead with integrity and clarity and who feel the weight of responsibility that leadership carries. The book offers a really practical framework that is strengths-based in nature, which is my whole vibe. If you have ever had a chance to engage with any of my stuff, that's my whole vibe. But that framework is intended to help leaders understand themselves more clearly, see themselves more clearly, and then do something with that information for the betterment of their team. Congruent leadership starts with self-awareness, and self-awareness gives us insight into our patterns under stress, how our strengths can actually hinder us sometimes, the limitations that we bring to the table. And here's something else that's really important that I want to say is that self-awareness does not happen automatically just over time with experience or, seniority. In fact, sometimes leaders who are at the very top of their organizations are the most unself-aware among us. And that's because over time, we've gotten less and less feedback about how we're experienced. So that's one of the reasons why I shared that percentage before, why that 10 to 15% percentage remains so low. Congruent leadership invites us to actively pursue self-awareness, to seek clarity instead of just hoping that it happens over time. So what I want you to do if you are a leader looking to grow in self-awareness and congruence is to consider questions like, how do my strengths show up under pressure? What are some patterns that others may notice that I overlook? How does my communication land with others when stakes are high? And here's the deal. Those questions can feel very uncomfortable to ask ourselves. Leadership is hard. Leading people is hard, but it's so rewarding when you do it in a way that builds trust and, again, brings clarity to your team. When you are a leader who values congruence, you are the kind of person that others feel safe giving feedback to. You are the kind of leader that invites a culture of feedback as opposed to just tolerating the opinions of other people. And the thing about congruence is it's really easy sometimes for us to assume that other people understand our intentions. But think about it like this. Imagine maybe a leader who values excellence so much that they assume that their teams see that value show up in their communication, but really what their teams see is, a nitpicky leader or somebody who's never satisfied or who doesn't acknowledge the good that happens, right? In that case, the leader's values, while awesome, are also creating some challenges. And imagine a situation in which that leader feels comfortable moving towards their team to learn about the impact that they're having and then does something as a result of it. That's congruent leadership. On this channel, you'll learn really practical frameworks that you can use, reflection questions that you can use to grow, and that you can take back to your team and to your organization. So if you're a leader who wants to feel more aligned, if you are responsible for developing leaders inside your organization, ultimately, if you care about building cultures that are rooted in trust and clarity and consistency, you're in the right place. My goal, whether through this channel, through the book, or through my speaking, is always to help leaders lead with greater alignment and congruence, because leadership works best when who you are, what you value, and how you show up reinforces one another over time. So if this conversation sounds like it resonates with you, I invite you to like and to subscribe and to join me here. Do all of the things, like and share and subscribe. You can learn more about the Congruent Leader, my speaking work, and other leadership programs I facilitate at my website, LeAnneLagasse.com. Thanks so much for being here. I'm so glad you're a part of this conversation. And as always, I'm rooting for you.